Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Chris Colwyn, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, my man?
Hi, Pete. Good to see you.
Good to see you, my friend. We've been trying to get this conversation together for a little while because I've been fishing around the world of FRS as I've had this sort of overwhelming concern, probably for a couple of years, but certainly in the last 12 months, when we've been reading about decontamination. We've got a greater understanding of some of the nasties that are out there. And I think it was July. Yeah, it was July last year, wasn't it? When World Health Organization officially declared firefighting to be, and the materials and substances that we interact with, they said serving as a practicing firefighter is classified as a carcinogenic thing. Now, I know you've been doing a lot of work with it, and you do a lot of work specifically with Hunter Apparel as well. But before we go into that rabbit hole, I wondered if we could just start with a whistle-stop tour of your experiences with the UK Fire and Rescue Service and kind of how you come to be before me today, really.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Pete. I really appreciate it. And you're right, it's a subject that's very dear to my heart, and I know Simon Hunter's heart. As you said, I'm working with Simon on this latest venture that we've embarked upon. But to answer your question, I joined the Fire Brigade, as it was called then, Fire and Rescue Service. I joined the Fire Brigade in 1989. And
I was born in 89. Damn. Sorry.
Thanks for that. That's made me feel really good. If your viewers or listeners could see me, they'd know I didn't look that old.
No, you don't. I look about as old as you. That's a bad thing. Sorry, go on.
But I joined in 1989 and real fond memories of my career. So retired in 2021, having served 32 years. And
wow.
I don't know why, but all serving and retired firefighters like to tell people how long they did. It's just a cultural thing, I think.
We do that when we go around a room. I change that up. You know, when you go in, we're just going to do an introduction for the course, and people go, "My name's Jeff." And I always start with, "My name's Pete. I've got 2 kids. I've got a wife. I like to train a lot. I've got horses." And it kind of catches people, by surprise, because there's a strange correlation between time served and people assume experience and knowledge, but it's not always this case, is it?
Not at all. No, not at all. You could have 30 years of very little experience, and you could have all the most horrific incidents in the first year of your service. So it's not really an indicator, but it's something that we do. And to be honest, I don't have a major problem with it, because I joined a watch in 1989, as I said, and it was very much a respect for your fellow firefighters, firemen, as they were called then. That's a whole different story around firemen, firefighters. It was predominantly men in those days, but you had this respect for those that had done a bit more than you.
Mm-hmm.
And even down to the mess table where I joined. I remember walking in the first day, and after the initial stitch up of telling me to sit in this seat here, which I took, and then found out it was the sub-officer's seat, and I was drinking out of his cup that they'd given me. And he was a mountain of a man. He was like a silverback, and sort of shadow came over me as I was a young sort of 11 stone when I was wet, sort of little greedy person, and he's leaning over me saying, "Excuse me, son, you're in my chair, and that's my
You're
cup.
lost, mate."
You're lost. And if you look right down the end of the table down there, that's where you sit. And I sort of skulked down there along with others that had done similar time to me. But it was done in jest, and I took it as, not jest, but it was done in a soft way that actually I didn't mind. And you sort of worked your way up the table, and the more senior you became. So I think that's why people talk about their time in, because they have similar experiences probably.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
The good thing about that was firefighters, the more senior ones, would tell you if you were stepping out of line. And that peer challenge is something that I think is so important because, you get the senior firefighter saying, "Look, listen here, Sonny, you're stepping out of line and you're upsetting the old man," as they refer to him then. And before you know it, we'll be doing all sorts. So you just calm it down and you go, "Okay, sorry."
I think that's so important. I always call it like that self-cultural calibration. It should, the ultimate responsibility is the leader and or manager, whatever we're calling them. But it's so much better when a team, I used to see this in rugby and sports teams, where the older serving team members, they weren't the captain or even the assistant captain, but they were sort of calibrating the team and giving that little bit of feedback. Sometimes we've lost that in certain places, but it's very, very valuable. And everyone should be upholding those sorts of ideas and values, I suppose.
Oh, definitely. And it has more impact. If one of your peers tells you you're stepping out of line or you need to just perhaps reflect on that, then it has more resonance. But and I found that as I went through my career, it was one of the things that frustrated me more than anything as I progressed. And so I served about 5 years on what everyone would affectionately call the busiest station in the county where I served. Others would say, you would be a bit like we talked about earlier. Others would say, you get a lot of shouts, but you don't get any real, sort of exciting ones. But, so there was always that dilemma and discussion. But after leaving that busy station, I went to the training centre. I was an instructor. I was a breathing apparatus instructor, general instructor, taught on recruit courses. Really enjoyed that part of my career.
Yeah. And again, now love it.
Love it, yeah. And again, it's got relevance to the topic we're going to talk about around decontamination, because it's in those environments where you really do achieve the behavioural change that I think is so important, because you set the standard and you set it so high, and knowing that when people leave the training centre, they're going to drop back naturally. They're going to drop back from that standard a little bit, but you've set it sufficiently high that it's still at a very good standard. And I think, that's what you need to see in your training centres. You need to see the highest of standards. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed trying to attain that. But then when I moved on from there into station command, the frustrations do emerge where, you didn't see that peer challenge, and you would be talking to a watch that would be quite challenging at times, because they felt passionately about their views. And you were trying to put a different view across. And the frustrations I used to get was when you walked outside the room and one by one or 2 or 3 of them would come up to you separately and say, "Just to let you know, I do agree with you." I used to call them out. I hate that. I used to call them out and say, whoa, no, you don't do that to me.
I used to do that in the room, because I'd ask loads of questions, and then people would be like, and I'd be like, right, has anyone else got any questions? I said, so when the chief leaves in a minute or whatever, don't start saying stuff to me. Yeah. Because now is your opportunity. It's a safe space. Come on, guys. You've heard me. I've led the way. I've used some flexible language. So hopefully that opens the gates for you all to do the same. But no, sorry, you're absolutely right.
No, I'd call them out and say, no, you've got to have a voice, You've got a voice. Your view is important, and you are allowed to challenge your peers as well as your seniors.
Yeah.
So I did various roles in station command, and then went to headquarters and got various promotions, and very much ops focused. So operational services, so dealing with the operational policies and procedures, new equipment, new vehicles. And when I retired as the director of operations, so base assistant chief officer. And yeah, fantastic time, because it enabled you not only to do some good stuff within your county, but also enabled you to work on a national level as well. And that's perhaps where, again, why we're here talking today, is because during that time, I was also the national lead for PPE and clothing. So
I must have given you such a more holistic view when you got both to that sort of ACO level, but also began to see various practices and different approaches to what we all think is often the same hazards that we meet with, but different services up and down the country. And I see it especially across the world, like they speak with different subject matter experts, they utilize different equipment, they have a different risk appetite or a different understanding of certain hazards and certain aspects of the job and how they could cause harm to our personnel. So I suppose when you get to that level, it gets really quite interesting because you do start to see those variations.
Yeah, it's interesting, it's challenging, but it's also empowering. And it's great to have those conversations, because at that level you do get the challenge, and you do get people who aren't afraid. You know, like we just said, people might sit on their hands and perhaps not speak out. Where at that level, you'll normally find people in those forums normally will, because they've got a passion for the subject. And I don't mean because of the rank on their shoulder, because quite often in those forums, you might be talking to various ranks. It's not all officers.
Yeah, you have like working groups of people that are really interested in it. Yeah.
But they've got a passion, and they will come at you and say, no, I don't agree. And I love that. I really do. But I think the biggest challenge, I think, for the UK Fire and Rescue Service is getting that consensus and taking people with them, because, you know, we're in a unique position in that there's 45 fire and rescue services. And so you've got this obvious comparator where you can say, well, look, you know, why I want to do something new. Well, they're doing it over there. Why don't I just copy them? But there's this reluctance to do that. And I think that's, you know, trying to get people to work collaboratively and listen to what others have experienced before and learn from that. I think we're slow to do that and reluctant to do that. And
why do you think that is?
I think there's this I need to bring my people with me. So if I need to bring my people with me, they need to be involved from the beginning. And there's always this culture of, well, we don't do it like that, you know. And that's not just between service and service. That's actually within service. When you look at stations, you know, as we touched on earlier, you know, we would say we were the busiest station, we were the best station. Other stations would say something different. So you've got all these different sort of subgroups within a service, and then externally between services, you've got different opinions that are led by different viewpoints and different leadership styles. And so I think, you know, the NFCC PPE clothing committee have got a real difficult task to get everybody sort of moving, and they've done very well. They've got a good number moving in a similar direction, but it is difficult, you know, because they've all got their own way and views of doing things.
Do you think it's simply a case sometimes of being able to articulate the why? Because, I mean, Simon Sinek's got an old great book about that. But like most people, especially when we're speaking about decontamination and stuff, with the overwhelming evidence that we've all effectively seen and that we've certainly come into contact through things like World Health Organization, through some of the horrible outcomes of some of the larger incidents in the UK and the studies that have been done by some academics, there's very little challenge on the why do we need to make a change, because the evidence seems to be quite overwhelming. But it's the how, isn't it? It's the how and the what, where people tend to then start applying their own mechanisms and way of dealing with the agreed what.
Well, I think what we all know is that in the fire service, it's full of people who are doers. Our whole profession, and I still consider it my profession, even though I've retired from service, but my whole life was about dealing with problems, you know, and I was with people that were there to deal with problems. And so we are fixers and we fix things. And that's great because you get that drive and you get people wanting to do it. But I use the analogy with decontamination. I think it's a very similar analogy to when community safety first entered into our vocabulary.
Okay.
And I remember being on a station talking. I remember the station commander coming down, and I think I was a leading firefighter at the time, crew manager in today's terminology. And I remember them coming down and saying, right, we've got this new initiative. We're going to try and stop the fires from happening in the first place. And there was uproar because what? We actually joined to go to fires. And we're saying, well, actually, no, if we could actually keep people safe in a different way, why wouldn't we do that? Totally laudable and the right thing to do. So, but so as people slowly got on board with that, they then suddenly started developing their own little initiatives. And I think that's importantly part of the process, that you get that challenge at an early stage and people start to do their own little things, but it wasn't really coordinated. So we went down a lot of dead ends and a lot of rabbit holes in the first place to reduce certain types of incident and so on. And I think it's not until, some years later that you've got a far more holistic approach to it, from a national level right the way down to a local level, where actually we are making great inroads in terms of reducing harm and suffering through community safety initiatives. And the journey we're just embarking on now is a good example of that, where no doubt every service has probably got a contaminants group set up, newly formed or been formed over the last few years, and they will be working on their own initiatives to try and deal with what they see as the main problem, because they're doers, they're fixers, and that's laudable and that's good. We have to go through that process, but it's got to be, eventually it will be more coordinated, but that's the journey we've got to go on. And it'd be good if we can do it quicker, because as we've said at the outset, those statistics make grim reading.
I think of it a little bit like, so to use that community safety analogy, and perhaps even the analogy of national operational guidance as well, it's like for community safety, we have to have overwhelming strategies that we agree on and some guidance that we agree on. And then locally, how you apply that is your own tactics. So the community aspect of it will be, you've got different cultural variations or different population density or whatever it might be where you are. So your tactics of implementing these agreed strategies and guidance can have some flexibility, and you want to empower people to make those decisions. But I feel like that bit of clarity when it comes to decontamination around that overarching strategy, because then, like you say, at station bases and service brigade basis, they will have their own tactics of how to implement some of these safer systems of ways of dealing with this. But yeah, we still need to get together and, like I say, there's working groups to almost agree the strategies and to better understand the problem as well.
I think, if you've got strategic objectives that everyone can buy into, and then, as you say, how you get there you might be more effective in your service of getting there following one particular route, which is different or slightly amended to another services, because they've got slightly different problems or different issues. And you only have to look at your big metropolitan services. Their challenges will be somewhat different to a more rural fire and rescue service in terms of demand alone, and turning PPE back around and getting it back on firefighters' back so that they remain able to turn out and do their job.
But equally, it's no harder or easier than when you use someone like Scotland, where their logistics, their actual layout across the whatever it was, 4 services that now become one. Bloody hell, that's a big. It's not dense at all. That's some big travel expense and kerfufflery and all that sort of jazz.
Yeah.
Take us back for a second, sorry, about like when did decon and the idea of that first come across your radar when you were serving? When did you remember these conversations happening? Because I remember when I first joined, there was stuff about them, but it must have been around when you were sort of in the 90s. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it was as early as the 90s, if I'm honest. I mean, if you think back, I was thinking about this before today. As we said, I joined in 1989, and I remember being issued with yellow leggings, plastic yellow leggings, rubber boots, a tunic which would best be described as a donkey jacket, and a cork helmet. And some plastic gloves. The gloves obviously were not mandatory. They're optional. If you wanted to wear them going into a BA job, you could. Some of the older hands didn't. Some of them looked frowned upon you if you did wear them. But because the kit was very basic then, the way we cleaned it was with just soap and water, washing powder. tell you a story. My recruit course, first night in the service, I was in a dormitory with 23 other firefighters in bunk beds. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? I'm 23 years old and I'm in a dormitory with 23 other guys and I don't know what I've let myself in for. And as I was laying there about midnight, just trying to get off to sleep, the door literally come off its hinges to the dormitory. And there was this silhouette of this firefighter in even older gear than what we had on. He had the what they call the Milton tunic, which was a bit more cut in. It wasn't so much like the donkey jacket fit. And I've got this vision in this silhouette of this guy in the doorway with the light behind him. He had the high crested cork helmet on, which was slightly different to ours. He had the axe tied around his belt. And he just proceeded to swear and scream and holler at us to get out of bed, calling us everything under the sun. And they had made us, after they'd issued us with all this kit, they had made us stow it down this very narrow corridor. And I mean narrow. It was, you couldn't walk two abreast down this corridor. And so there was 24 pegs down there with all the kit that had to be pristinely hung up there before we retired to bed. And he was screaming at us to get our fire kit on. So we ran down, and of course we were climbing over each other. We were just, it was like a rugby scrum. There was elbows going in, there was all sorts. Eventually we make it out into the drill yard. And I remember standing there to attention, and he was bellowing at us, and he was going down the line, checking to see what we had on underneath. Well, of course, in our rush, nobody had put anything on underneath. So he was going, "You'll burn. You'll burn. Yeah, you haven't done your buttons up right. You'll burn." And as he was talking, I was looking over his shoulder. And I thought, is that in the darkness? Can I see smoke coming out of that firehouse behind him? And I thought, oh, bloody hell, what's he going to do when he finds out they didn't put the fire out from today's drills or whatever? And I was going to raise my hand and say something, but I didn't have to, because before I knew it, he said, "Right, double away to that door." And he pointed to the door where the smoke was coming out. No. And he made us all line up. No word of a lie. He made us all line up. He had his mate, another instructor, already.
What time of day is this? Sorry.
This was about 12:30 at night.
Beautiful.
So okay. I'm thinking, right, okay. And he then proceeded us to go in one behind the other in the ground floor, up the stairs. And as we go up the stairs, you could hear the crackle of the fire. And the smoke's coming down. No breathing apparatus on. Literally just these yellow leggings, rubber boots, donkey jacket and cork helmet. And he's screaming at us to get on our bellies. So we're on our bellies doing like a commando crawl around the top floor of this firehouse. And he was there laying on his stomach with his head in the doorway. And as we went past, I mean, my eyes were streaming, snot hanging out my nose. I was coughing and spluttering. And he was basically saying, "Do you like it? Are you glad you joined? Do you want to go home to your mum?" Yeah, I think I do, actually. Yeah. And we crawled past the fire and out the external staircase and back down into the drill yard, coughing and spluttering. And that was my first day in the fire service. And then he was saying, "And if your kit's not clean in the morning, there'll be all hell to pay." So we did no more than actually wear the leggings into the showers and get washing powder and just scrub the legging.
Hey folks, just wanted to jump in with a quick piece around firefighter health and wellbeing. Whether you are trying to join the fire service and pass them tricky fitness tests, if you are currently serving, or if you are coming up to that next chapter of your life, retiring from the emergency services, we get so many different questions around it. So in partnership with Fitness for the Frontline, we have come up with a series of guidance and programs specifically designed to reflect the physical elements of the role of a firefighter. So whether it's carrying an LPP across an overgrown field, lifting a ladder above your head under running it, or wrestling with cutting gear for 30 plus minutes at some kind of complicated RTC, our bodies are required to lift, push, and carry objects in very specific circumstances. That is effectively what Fitness on the Frontline focuses on, as well as the longer term aspects of overall health and wellness for our firefighters. Now, we are definitely not about to be smashing out world records or getting that beach body ready in 6 weeks rubbish. The systems and programs that we put in place are adjusted for people's current fitness levels, and they're not a prescriptive weight or a one-size-fits-all BS. it is very likely for myself personally that I'm still going to be a firefighter when I'm 60 plus. So longevity in the role is really important to me. And I know it is for so many people out there. It all starts with no obligation, 7 days worth of the programming, absolutely free. So whether you're joining, serving, or looking at the next chapter in your life, Fitness for the Frontline is designed by firefighters for firefighters. Now back to the show.
So, there's both ends of it there. You're going in. So there's my initial exposure to carcinogens, little did I know. No breathing apparatus. But the cleaning of the kit, the subsequent cleaning of the kit was probably easier then because it was so basic. You could just scrub. You didn't have membranes in there that hold the carcinogens within the fabric. So, and that was it. And your helmet, if your helmet got dirty and you couldn't get it any cleaner, you painted it yellow. You give it a fresh coat of paint.
I love it.
Your helmet's dirty, you better go
Wet paint on the parade square in the morning.
And that was, and I don't feel like that was that long ago. I know many people.
Well, it was.
We'll say
5 years ago, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was an age ago. But to me, it doesn't seem that long ago that it was that sort of industrial, I suppose is the word.
I remember hearing a similar story from an Australian firefighter, and he said the same, that they did have 2 BA sets on their trucks, but it was strongly discouraged that anybody should use them. And if somebody saw you with one on, you'd get an absolute bollocking because, and he said to me, and I've had several variations of this type of justification, but the old firefighter's mustache, he said to me, it was about like, you'd try and get your nose down behind the branch and you would tuck yourself into your mustache. And that was effectively acting as a little bit of a stiff, and you'd try and stay behind that sort of negative pocket of pressure behind the branch, and that would be your safe spot. And that's what he said, the whole mustache, and you didn't need BA, you just needed to be a good branch operator. And I was like, wow. But many people ended up with some horrible illnesses from his time.
And similar story with the flash hoods. I mean, we were never given flash hoods for well into my career. And I remember when they first issued them, there was uproar. There was uproar amongst the workforce because they were saying, you're protecting us too much. And I was still quite young in service, and I was just going along with thinking, really? I don't know. Isn't it a good thing that they're protecting us? And they'd say, no, because when you go into a job, Sonny Jim, you've got to know when you're standing too high or it's too hot, because your ears will start to crackle and your skin will start, and you'll feel your ears burning. If you've got a flash hood on, you will go past that point and then you'll collapse inside. And that was the viewpoint they had. And there was some real tough sort of discussions between management and the grassroots around whether we should be wearing flash hoods or not.
That's very strange.
Yeah. So what different culture it was then.
Yeah.
So it does move, because now I think,
I think it's massive acceleration now. It's accelerating at like leaps. It's not like the old, it wasn't like numerical advances back then. Here's an extra piece of kit, and then a few years later, here is a thought. Now it's like every year we are taking leaps forward in our understanding the complexity of the design of the stuff, and just like, just overwhelming ways in which we can protect our individuals, but we've still further to go with it.
Yeah, and kit today now, they are highly technical garments, highly technical garments. And, the membranes in them alone just make it very difficult to launder it. It's like I say, the old kit, you could stand in the shower and scrub the yellow leggings and try and get them clean, and they probably didn't hold too much afterwards. But the fabrics that, they're highly technical garments that hold the contaminants. And the traditional water-based laundry systems that most use today probably aren't cutting the mustard. They're probably not. If you was to test the kit when it come back, you might be alarmed at how much carcinogenic material is still within it, even though it does smell or look cleaner.
With the greatest respect to you, from the data I've looked at, there's not really any probably about it from what I've personally seen, because they're bringing them back and they are testing them. And like you said, because no matter what temperature we're washing at or whatever solutions we're putting into it, it's not penetrating in the way, because we're so indoctrinated is when we say washing our kit, we think of it as clothing. We'll tumble dry it, we'll do it hot, we'll do it this, we'll do it that. And that, it's just because of how you condition, because the way you grew up and the way I grew up. And it's like that always thought to myself that was the most logical way of doing it, and just wash it better and more. But as I started to understand the membrane aspect of it, was the shock value for me, because looking at the testing data from those, there's still a large amount of carcinogen still within the garments.
Yeah, and depending on how many garments you put in the wash at any particular time, you're varying between 15 to 40 odd % cleaning ratio. That's the amount of carcinogenic material you're removing. And if you put 3 sets in the wash at once, you're down around the 15%. You reduce it to 2 sets, which isn't always commercially advantageous, then you're going to improve the efficacy of it, but still not great, is it? 40 odd %. Whereas we want to talk about today, liquid carbon dioxide is that decontamination process removes 99% of it.
When did you first come across this sort of data, and when did you first meet Simon? When was that penny drop moment of concern of, oh shit, we're not doing it?
So if we backtrack a little bit, I'll say through my career, I had a national reference for PPE, but all things ops within my own service as well. So I was always trying to keep my finger on the pulse and have an understanding of what was happening out there nationally. But I think it was, I couldn't put a year on it, but probably 8 or 9 years, 10 years ago, when I was talking with the team and a good friend of mine, Brett Egan, who works nationally technically on PPE. I remember him coming to me saying, I think we've got an issue here around contaminants. And around about the same time, one of our firefighters approached us probably about a year later and said, I've been looking and there's a real issue around contaminants. And we said, it was a bit like the Private Jones bit, step forward, that man, well done. Are you volunteering to, you've got a passion for it? And he was left holding the baby, and he did a very good job. And we started a number of years ago running this contaminants project, looking at how we can reduce exposure to contaminants. And it was very much politically contaminants, and that was the C word we used, rather than cancer. And I think there are still services that will probably maybe have that difficulty, whereas organisations like the Fire Brigades Union can be a lot more blunt, and and they've got the evidence to prove it now that it is cancer forming. So that's when it first sort of came across my radar. But what startled me was there didn't seem to be any solution to it. And I remember saying, well, we've got to turn this back out into the market. Our suppliers have got to help us overcome this problem, because we're doers, we think we have to have all the solutions. And so this needs better brains than us to look at what the solution is to remove the contaminants from kit. And then when you start to think about it, it's wider than that as well. Simon and I have produced a doodly video, which I'm happy to share to people, which talks about this whole subject, but very much it positions it in terms of, look, we're not saying this is the answer to everything in terms of firefighters' exposure to contaminants. It's not. It's a very important element to it, but it's not the entire answer. You've got to look at your policies and your procedures. You've got to look at your firefighting tactics. You've got to look at your cultures. You've got to look at your logistics about how you're moving kit around. But within that, you've also got to get a system that cleans the kit far better than traditional water-based laundry systems, because they're not doing it. And
there's only so far that a behavioural change can overcome a challenge like this. Past a certain point, it does need to be a technological innovation, such as what we're discussing today.
It does. But to go back to your point, so I was working on PPE then at a national level, and then I saw the movement grow. More and more people it was coming on their radar, and they were starting to ask more questions. As an aside, around about whenever COVID kicked in, 2019, wasn't it? End of 2019. That's when I really started to engage with Simon Hunter, but not necessarily around this topic. So Simon and I met through the pandemic because I was the national lead for PPE. I was on the NFCC COVID committee looking at the PPE aspect of COVID. And we set up a small team, and we worked with predominantly Simon Hunter and his team, Hunter Apparel Solutions, because they were the only they were the only company that were actually enabled to get PPE from Asia and elsewhere to the UK. And quite frankly, and I embarrass him with this quite regularly, every firefighter listening to this podcast, if you were on duty during COVID and you were wearing medical grade PPE, no doubt it was sourced from Simon Hunter and the team that I was working with. The man literally kept trucks on the run through his desire to do something to help the fire and rescue service. He has a passion.
I always think of Simon as like a bit of a juggernaut because he's got a real self-discipline in ensuring he checks the accreditation of the pipeline and he ensures the pipeline, the things that the company is delivering. And sometimes he has to do that to the detriment of himself because it will cost a little bit more or it takes a little bit longer. But then when things like the pandemic hit, he's built his house not on sand. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, he's visionary. He I mean, we've talked about this long and hard. So we met. We met during that time. He was doing his thing, working with my team. I was trying to remain a little bit more strategic. I wasn't getting, and he was the same. So he had the typical saying, "Yeah, my people were talking to your people." Yeah, and Simon was probably doing a lot more strategic things. I was doing more strategic things, and we didn't really have a lot of contact. All I kept hearing was these great things about, if it wasn't for Simon and his team, we'd be up the creek without a paddle.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, I was asked to join one of the meetings and thank Simon and the team for the work they were doing. And it was evident the work they were doing was fantastic. And so I did this bit at the end of the meeting, just thank them for what they did. I didn't realise the impact it had on Simon and his team until after I retired. And after I retired, I just reached out to Simon and said, "Look, I'm still looking to do some bits and pieces. I love the fire service. You've got a passion for the fire service, even though your company services the needs of train companies, airports, police, and ambulance. You've got this passion for fire. If there's anything I can assist you on," and he said, "Well, actually, come over. I'd love to work with you." And we went over there, and he embarrassed me when I walked in because he said, "This is the conference room where we listen to your thank you talk." And he said, "And you see that woman there, and you see that lady there, and she was in tears at the end of your chat because it was so moving and heartfelt." And so he said, "So we knew then that I wanted to work with you." And so we had this immediate bond, and we got on famously. And as they say, the rest is history. And Simon, being Simon, he wants to do something that makes real societal change. Yes, he's a businessman. Yes, he wants to do commercial things and make some money. But this particular venture is very much around societal change.
He's very into health and doing the right thing as well. I'm not going to blow too much smoke up Simon's ass, but I'll show you something that's right next to me here because I use it on a daily basis, right? This here, and I know people can't see the visual. This is a monk manual. And Simon and I had a good conversation about ice baths and self-discipline and long-term health and wellness. And for anybody that's not met him, he's quite unassuming, but he's actually so into that from a personal perspective as well. So it doesn't surprise me that he has a romantic spot for health and wellness for people in the first responder community as well.
Yeah. So we met and we started talking about this whole issue around decontamination and the issues. And that's when he introduced me to the concept of LCO2. And then we started to look at the evidence and, the fact that it will, you get the benefit of cleaner, decontaminated PPE. It's from a non-aggressive, environmentally friendly process. You get improved turnaround because there's no water involved, so you don't have the long drying times.
Okay.
That then gives you far more resilience in terms of your kit because you don't need as much kit in the first place because it now lasts longer because the traditional laundry systems really do impact the kit. As I say, it's a technical garment and it's quite an aggressive process.
Well, people know that even from a domestic perspective, when they've got a high value, technical, expensive garment and you smash it through hot washes full of chemicals, it is not going to last very long. You almost want to not be exposing it to some of those temperatures and chemicals as often as possible. Did some of this technology, when I was speaking with Simon and the team before, Where did this come from? Because nationally, you've been working with a couple of different countries to try and understand approaches from different angles as well, haven't you?
Yeah, so this came from America,
Okay.
North America. So Hunter Apparel have got the distribution rights for bringing in this process, LCO2, into the UK and Ireland. And the first machine is being installed as we speak, and hopefully will be ready to go around about April time.
So what does this look like? Is it an enormous, big? How is it processing liquid CO2? Does it just capture it from atmosphere? And
Yeah,
what does it actually look like?
It's like a big industrial washing machine.
Okay.
So very much like, out the back, if you went into your dry cleaners and you looked across the counter and across the back, it would look something akin to that. So you put the kit in. There's no water involved. There's about 7-stage cycles, which the kit goes through. No drying time, and as I say, you could benefit from an hour and a half turnaround time, as opposed to the turnaround time you get with traditional water-based systems, where they have to dry at a certain pace. You can't dry them too quickly because they shrink even more. So it removes all of those issues. So it just seems, when he was telling me about it, first off, I was saying, this just sounds too good to be true. So you're telling me we've got a system out there from America that actually decontaminates and removes 99% of the contaminants from kit, and it doesn't have any of the harmful impacts that traditional water systems do now. So we've been spending our time boiling our kit to achieve at best 45% efficacy, and seriously impacting on the characteristics of the garment, when we could have been doing it far more gently and more efficiently, and not, and it will then mean we don't need as much kit because we can turn it around quicker. We don't need the vast amounts of pool stock available, and actually it's going to last longer as well. The kit's going to last longer. So we don't need as much 469 kit. It just does sound too good to be true, but ultimately the people need to look at our Doodly video, and they will see in 4 minutes it will capture it far better than I'm probably articulating.
Because there were some aspects that the original process wasn't even adhering to some of these European REACH legislation aspects, was it? Because like you say, cleaning and decontamination are often used interchangeably, but they're not remotely the same thing.
Exactly that. You're spot on. If we were to look at it, you're probably exceeding the REACH legislation as well. So it's a win-win, but we're really much focused now on how do we implement this. And so we're currently going through a process of talking to fire and rescue service leaders and saying, look, we've got this process. It's not the entire answer, but I've got a view on that in terms of one of the big light bulb moments for me when I was talking with Simon when we first started talking about this was the reliance we've got in the fire and rescue service around health and safety and firefighter safety, which is paramount. Every firefighter deserves to come home at the end of the day, and we know, our thoughts are obviously with Scotland at the moment because they're going through this horrific situation now where sadly they lost one of their firefighters. So that's a real risk. That happens. That's the reality check of our profession. And so it's quite right and proper that we have this massive focus on health and safety.
Yeah.
I think everyone signed up to that. But when you think about, when I reflected, I thought, how much of it did I focus on safety and how much did I focus on health? And if I'm honest, it's all focused on the safety aspect.
Yeah.
That's what, we provide PPE to keep firefighters safe on the fire ground. So it's very much that focus.
I think it's the perception of time that does that, because if you don't wear a harness on top of a roof, you fall. And you very quickly realize in that 4 seconds that you fall in, you break your back and you're dead. And it's a very, very short period of time between not putting the provision in place and the result of not having that discipline versus things like carcinogens. I always echo it to things like smoking or poor nutrition. You don't notice the chains of those sort of decisions until they're too heavy to be broken. Do you know what I mean? Until you've got horrible arthritis, or you do develop something from smoking, or you've got a horrible health condition because of your dietary choices 15, 20 years down the line. And these are the things that I overlay onto my thought process with carcinogens, because
Yeah.
you could do it wrong for 20 years and then realize the cost of doing it wrong. It's not that you go straight in, launder it ineffectively, and then tomorrow you've got cancer, although that could potentially be the case because some people are getting it serving these days. But it's that perception of time that doesn't expedite these things, I think.
Well, you're dead right. I mean, that's the art. There's a massive irony there, though, that we provide PPE to protect our firefighters from harm and from injury on the fire ground, very much at that acute stage, and quite rightly, because that's where we are taking more risk, because we're there to prevent harm and suffering and save lives. So there has to be an element of calculated risk there. So it's very much about, we need to protect them from that harm. But the irony is, we then take the PPE, which was there to provide that service and protect us, and actually the PPE is now attributing to detrimental effects of firefighters' health.
This is what I'm saying. If you took yourself through that risk assessment mindset, though, we perceive the risk as low, but actually the likelihood, given the data that's all coming through now, is quite high. And the severity is cancer, potentially. Yeah. So the likelihood is getting higher, and the severity doesn't get much worse than a terminal illness. So it's that thing that when we have to zoom out and look at that holistical risk that we're placing firefighters in, and that's where I think conversations such as this and the work that you guys are doing needs to be given that spotlight.
Yeah. We've got John Cairns is the third member of the team with myself and Simon, and John from Scotland is very well sort of read on in terms of long-term health conditions. He always brings that element to the team and talks about it passionately and quite rightly. And I think it's something that we're only just waking up to now. We concern ourselves with the acute dangers and not the chronic ones. And I think now is the time to start realising that what we're doing in terms of getting that balance right between health and safety, and having a bit of not a shift away from the safety. It still needs to maintain at that height, but there needs to be better understanding and more focus on the long-term health implications of our occupation and what we do.
So zooming yourself back to your role when you were back in as ACO, when we're looking at potential benefits, now we couldn't, from knuckle dragging firefighters just like myself, we can go, well, yeah, but what's the cost of a life? So surely just do it because it makes sense. We're going through industrial action now. Everything's getting more expensive. Services are under colossal pressures financially. So whilst it shouldn't be a factor, you'll know better than anybody in the roles that you've done historically, these are the things that are getting factored in. But when we look at those pillars of potential benefits for services, first and foremost is the long-term health and wellness of their staff. But then we're talking about that expedited process of turning these around. We're talking about the less investment in pool stock and things like that. If you were to cast your mind back there, how would you, as I'm sure lots of fire and rescue services senior leadership teams are doing now, what are the factors that you see as like advantages, disadvantages, barriers to people taking this sort of thing on?
I truly believe that in the world of PPE at the moment, there is so much up in the air in terms of the NFCC and fire and rescue services knowing what their requirement is. And I think they've got that. They've then got the carcinogens issue, and the Fire Brigades Union quite rightly are, raising this as a massive issue, promoting, or demanding a call to action for it. And, I can't argue with them.
I don't think anybody disagrees with them, but like you say, it's the solution. Sometimes with unions, they just put spotlights on the problem, which they should do, and that's great. I think we're all aware of the problem now, so we need to be in solution mode. We do.
And that's why we're talking to fire service leaders saying, look, we think we've got part of the solution, because I think there's this acceptance that, we need firefighters to change their behaviour. We need, and that's slowly happening. You will see people getting their kit laundered more frequently than they would have done before because they wanted to wear it as the badge of honour that we've all heard about. So there's a lot of behavioural change, which I think is where the Fire Brigades Union are focusing on, this behavioural change and training packages and awareness. And
bagging it up at jobs, showering within the hour, all that sort of stuff.
And I think that's important, and we need that. That's the sort of thing that we need to happen. But as you move away, as you move away from the incident ground and
Yeah.
all of the support mechanisms that kick in, I think there's less excuse not to have something bona fide in place. So we know you have to accept some risk. So you go to a job, you're coming back from that job, you've got contaminated kit, and it's the only kit you've got, and then a person's reported shout comes in, you're going to put that contaminated kit on again, and you're going to go and try and save that person's life. That's a calculated risk that most firefighters have to take. But as you move away from that, and now the incident's dealt with, and you've got more time, well, then, you know, your logistics, your policies, your procedures, there's very little excuse for not getting those right. As you move away from that emergency stage. So I always talked about, you know, you've got the crisis management of an incident, which is dealing with the initial impact, but then you've got the consequence management. As a consequence of that incident, what are we now dealing with? And so if you look at the consequence of an incident in terms of PPE, having a credible system in place that enables you to launder that kit very quickly and get it back on firefighters' back without exposing them to more contaminants. There's not, you know, there isn't an excuse for not having something like that. But you're quite right. That's just one problem that the fire and rescue service are dealing with. There's the industrial action that's, you know, brought about by the cost of living crisis and a whole manner of world events. So, you know, you've got fire and rescue services out there that no doubt are struggling to, you know, make the numbers work in terms of finances and the budgets, and, you know, struggling to survive, let alone introduce new technology.
But my limited understanding, is that this isn't like a service contract that will replace their current PPE provider or anything like that. This is potentially, utilization of an asset or shared investment of an asset with other services to be able to utilize it. It's not something that they're going to have to factor for every single year on year going down the line, I think.
No, I mean, we're quite keen to talk to services in terms of how they would like to implement LCO2.
Okay.
And there are a number of different options that you could do. You know, the larger services or regions could actually purchase their own machine. And then you really would be benefiting from all of the advantages of LCO2, especially around the quick turnaround, which then leads to financial savings because you've got longer life of kit and you've got less numbers, less amount of kit required in the first place. So you could go down that route, or, you know, you could send it to Hunter's machine, and you wouldn't get the 1 hour turnaround, but you would get better decontaminated kit, and you probably still get it quicker than what you're getting it now. So it depends how far you invest into LCO2 as to the benefits that you reap from it. We're even talking about the possibilities of mobile units and trying to do things like that. So yeah, it's endless in where we could take this, and it's quite exciting. We are in the first instance, we're just trying to get services aware of the process, offering them an opportunity to trial the kit. So send their most decontaminated kit to us. We will run it through the LCO2 machine. If they want to get it tested, even though there are tests that have already been completed from various organisations, underwriters, laboratories, and the like, you know, we've got the evidence. NFPAs, we've got all the data. But if services wanted to do their own thing, we could, run it through the machine for them so they could see it for themselves. There are endless opportunities in how you use LCO2.
Well, it reassures me the fact that we're finally moving towards at least some options that people could potentially start grabbing hold of. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. We've spoken how important it is, or, nationally or even internationally, we've spoken about how important this is. Now the technology has gotten to the point where people can start implementing some solutions.
No, you're right. And it's sort of like always, if the more people that get on board with it and actually adopt it, the more, the better the commercial elements to this would be as well. Because the more people that use it, then the more financially viable it becomes.
Yeah, cheaper it gets. And that's where I think these regional groups and the regional steering groups will probably work quite well. Because certainly when you look at some of the shire brigades or some of those that are just like more closely geographically located, I think there's lots of opportunities for shared work in there. And when you look at the potential for them to reduce their pool of kit anyway, their rotations wouldn't need to be as intensive. And I'm sure some very clever individual working in a headquarters could run those calculations as to how often we currently do it, how often it currently takes versus how long it would take. So we'd reduce our pool stock by X, and we'd on average be looking at this many turnovers a year, and there'd be associated cost savings with that.
Yeah. And if you look at, majority of fire and rescue services now are in the same kit, and they are probably split roughly 50-50, I would imagine, between those that are in a fully managed service and those that are in a purchase only and then do their own care and maintenance and laundry. But if you look at the fully managed service, yeah, on paper, it seems a really good process. It's expensive because you don't own the kit, you're leasing the kit, and you are very much passing the responsibility over to a third party. You're not necessarily passing over the accountability, but you're passing over the responsibility for that kit. And so for many reasons, I can see why services would want that fully managed service. But as I say, it is an expensive option.
And also with something like that, the devil's in the detail, because it will probably say somewhere in their thing of their contract about our responsibility to you is to clean the kit. And that's the differentiation between cleaning, washing, and decontaminating. There might be some sticky ground to navigate through contracts with that.
Yeah, but and you're dead right. But think of it in this way: if we now know that every incident we go to is going to be harmful to our health in terms of the atmosphere that we breathe, is that not any different to a chemical incident? And you know yourself, if you get called out to a chemical incident, there's very laid down, prescriptive, detailed procedures. Wind direction, slope of the land, double bagging the kit. Everyone steps back and
triple bagging, respirators on. 2 sets of nitrile gloves, blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got to, but we don't do any of that for a regular, if there is such a thing as a regular fire. Yeah. We don't. So really, should we not be thinking about every incident as a chemical incident? Because the harmful products that are there are going to, as we say, have long-term impacts on our health into our
not just ours as well. I remember when I first joined, and it would be far worse for yourself, I'm sure, going home and hugging your kids and stuff like that and going, "Oh, daddy, you stink," and "Oh, daddy, have you been to a fire?" and this, that, and the other, and putting my washing in with the rest of my family's clothing. Honestly, I feel quite guilty about that now, but I didn't know any better. Now I know better, I'll do better.
I remember being breathing apparatus instructor, and I remember staying in my kit all day because I just didn't want to take the wet, dripping, soaked, carbonaceous covered kit off at lunchtime and then have the pain of putting it back on. So we used to sit out in the yard, and in the kids, they used to pass cheese and onion rolls out the window to us. So we probably didn't even wash our hands. When you think back, what were we doing? So we were eating sort of on the go and then getting back in there. So I was wearing BA 4 times a day, every day. And then I was coming home, and like I say, you'd shower before you left work. You come home and then you go, do you know what? I still smell the smoke. I'm going to go have another shower. And in the shower, you could still smell it. Two showers later, you could still smell that product coming off you. So, we know that's there. We just, now that we know that that's going to damage our health, we need to wake up to it in terms of giving it due respect. And I think there's, like I say, it's liquid carbon dioxide cleaning, decontaminating is a massive step forward. But in terms of policies and procedures, national ops guidance you mentioned earlier, there's a role to play there in terms of decontamination sectors. I remember when ICS first was introduced and people going, yeah, well, that's okay for 10, 15, 20 pump jobs, but you wouldn't go to all that grief and aggro for a 1 pump job. You wouldn't have a command support. And actually they said, no, it's scalable. You have your command support as your pump operator. That's your command support. It's all scalable. And I think, again, using that analogy, that's how we need to focus on decontamination. It's scalable. So if you've got a large incident, there should be a decontamination sector for sure. But even the small one pump fires, there should be a consideration. And you talked earlier about your strategic objectives. There are objectives that we should have, and how you achieve them is scalable. And you say, well, no, look, on a one pump job, you still need to factor in how you're going to decontaminate the kit, how you're going to return to station.
It should become that initial next step. As soon as you know you've committed BA, part of your, we'll set up a BA servicing area is, well, they need to have their bags there. They need to have their shoes there. They need to have their other uniform there. So they can take all this PP off. They can take the set off. They can bag it. They can put it in a separate part of the fire engine, and they get on the fire truck, and they have not got another task to do on that incident ground. If you need more personnel, well, then you mobilize more personnel. And I know organizationally, it's a ball ache, and so it's going to be a long, hard, clunky behavioral change. But once you've done that first ugly, annoying bit, and people have the self-discipline to put themselves on the truck, wipe themselves down, and say, well, I haven't got any more fire kit, so that's me for this incident. Once we've done that and it's become habit, and, it's the best time to do it because we've got so many people coming into the UK Fire and Rescue Service now with recruitment. They'll know no different. It'll just be the old buggers like me moaning about it, but they'll get over it after a 5-year period. It'll change.
And you train, training centres have got a big part to play here.
Got to be gold standard. They've got to lead.
Be gold standard. They've got to in every small thing. I remember walking through our training centre in my last year. I was walking across to a meeting. I saw this BA course, initial BA course taking place, and they were sat outside on a picnic table with their tunics off, leggings on, still caked in muck from the BA wear they just had, and that one person was smoking and one person was eating a sandwich. And I said, what are we doing? If we're not doing it here, we're not going to, they're going to take this away. The things about putting gloves in helmets or in your boots and passing the contaminant in that way, we've got to iron out all of those behavioural changes. And it comes from setting such a high standard at your training centre.
We're doing it now, mate. People I just need to pop into the office to get my, no, there's no semi-clean areas. All right. There's a clean area and there's a dirty area. So just get your shit in a row, get yourself organised before you begin the drill, before you get out there and put your fire kit on. So you've not got to pop into the office, you've not got to pop upstairs in your fire kit and do anything at all. And we've got to be that gold standard.
And I tell you, you touched on something else there that's a pet topic of mine, and it probably won't be that popular with some of the listeners, but it's around this whole fascination we've got with breathing apparatus. So we have breathing apparatus courses, and I suspect most fire and rescue services have breathing apparatus courses. Surely it's a firefighting course. Breathing apparatus is one element of firefighting, but I think nationally, certainly in my service, we have this massive fascination around breathing apparatus. We didn't have road traffic collision equipment, hydraulic rescue equipment courses. We had road traffic collision courses.
RTC courses, yeah.
RTC courses. So this whole fascination around BA, and it's important to focus on that, because when I was in service, we did an operational capability review. We looked at every aspect of our operational response, and we started with our core skills of firefighting and road traffic collisions, and we moved on to working at height, hazardous materials, unstable ground, everything you could conceivably think about. But we started with fires and firefighting. And through our research, we found that the vast majority, if not all of our incident commanders defaulted to 2BA and hose reel. 2BA and hose reel was their default go-to. That's what I'm going to do. And I understand it, because we have this reliance on prescription. But I would contest, is it an over-reliance on prescription? Because we're going out to incidents and we're thinking there's a bit unknown there. And the natural human behaviour is to think, I want to try and preempt what I'm going to. I want to preempt what, if you're going to sit an exam tomorrow, if someone said you can have the questions.
ICS reaccreditation, isn't it? You just, as soon as you get up there, I'm going to make up for 4 pumps and 2BA hose reel. What is it? It's an animal rescue, 2BA hose reel.
Oh, yeah. Bugger. Why did I do that? And so you've got that issue. And again, it comes back to our chronic and our acute discussion earlier. So BA, is important in terms of protecting us from that acute danger. But it then gives you a chronic danger.
There's a cost to it, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't clean it correctly and you don't put the rubber gloves on when you're servicing your BA set, and you haven't got a mask on, which we never did, back at the station, then again, you're increasing that impact on your health. So then you get into, you sort of take that one step further. You start to think, well, when we're coming back from an incident, we're putting BA sets back in the cab because they're in the cab because we might have to rig en route. And you're thinking, well, why are you rigging en route? Well, because we're saving seconds. And my challenge would always be, if you demand the ability to rig en route, you are really curtailing my options as an incident commander. I should be able to turn up and act with self-efficacy. And what I mean by that is you should be able to have the skills, the knowledge, the experience to be able to say, yeah, I've got an indication of what we're turning out to, but I'm going to wait to confirm that when I get there, and then I'm going to select my tactics. And actually, while I'm sizing up that job, thermal scanning, deciding where the fire is and what my approach is going to be from the vast number of options I've got on that truck that costs £250,000 that's parked up behind me. If I can't rely on you to put your BA set on as I'm briefing you in 40 seconds, you're not doing your job right.
Yeah.
And how many firefighters actually practice putting a BA set on, stood up, and doing it that quickly? But instead, we want to preempt what we've got. So we go, rig en route. And so then you're already committed to that whole fallacy of, I'm always going to send two BA operators.
It's always more of a ball ache when there's two members stood off the truck wearing BA ready and you ask them just to drop their sets. It takes them 5 minutes to get back on, piss about, take it off. And it's like, oh, now the incident is getting worse because the tactical plan I've got in my head, just to me and the driver now, you know what I mean? Yeah. Before everyone else bowls up, because the two of you with the best of intentions have self-deployed a little bit.
I self-deployed a bit, and I'm messing around with the BA set now and all the buckles and so on. Yeah. So the whole clean cab process is another issue. In my service, we did remove the BA
Well, a lot
set.
of services they have. A lot of the new trucks, they're coming on them sliding out, those sort of weird slide-out lockers from just behind the rear cab, which I think is fantastic. That's another little technical change, which avoids the necessity for the behavioral change because it removes the possibility for the firefighter to take it back on a truck with them.
Engineer it out, engineer it out. There is. I mean, and you're right. I fully agree. I think it's a great step forward. You do have to bear in mind as you're pulling up to the job, if you're down a tight road and you've got cars parked either side, and you can't get the set out the side locker. So when you're introducing new things, you really have got to work that problem right the way through. I mean, I still would go with that option because you can pull up before the two parked cars and walk that extra distance. But we
don't pretend any of these things are easy. And I do feel for people working in appliance and equipments and stores and stuff like that when someone says, "I'll just get this new bit of kit chuck on the truck." Okay, where do you want it to go? And what do you want to lose in place of it? Because it's full. Okay, so where's this thing going to go? It's not an easy thing you've just asked me to do there.
And if I could put something extra on a kit on a fire engine now, it would be space for second sets of PPE.
Yeah.
Because that would be, that is a real issue for firefighters, and I've heard it from them when you talk to them. So why aren't you taking your second kit? I said, well, if you walked a mile in our shoes, we physically cannot get that second set of PPE in the cab with us. We wouldn't be able to move. And you have to listen to them. They are real problems that aren't surmountable, but they are problems. But perhaps it's about taking something else off the truck
there's a few bits and bobs I'll take out of there. I know there's some services still ride around with their RPS suits or their gas tight suits on them. And I'm like, fuck them off. Leave them on your chemical unit, wherever that is in service. Get rid of them. You know what I mean? Put sets of PPE in there. But there's a million different ways. And again, this is perhaps down to local tactical solutions given the risk and core profile of their services or brigades. There's always options.
There are options. There's a massive task for the UK Fire and Rescue Service to deal with. So when you try and introduce something new, LCO2, you've got to work hard at it because they can't see the wood for the trees in many respects. And they're dealing with lots of different problems. And it's like anything, you've got to segment your problems, haven't you? And then try and chip away. But I think there's a real danger that at the moment, UK Fire and Rescue Service is waiting for the next thing to cement that. So that means, we can do this, which then means we can do that. And
we're in a kind of tactical pause at the minute.
Yeah, and I think, well, actually,
someone's got to step forward first, and it sounds like they've already got some of these services coming on board anyway. So there are those brave individuals stepping forward and going, no, I've looked at it. Yes, let's go.
Yeah. And of course, the NFCC aren't going to be so keen on that piecemeal approach because it sort of splinters it a bit. And, going back to the fully managed service, they would argue that the fully managed service would work brilliantly if everybody did the same thing, because then you would have more laundry providers services in closer locations, and you wouldn't be moving contaminated kit out of your county or out of your area and taking it to another part of the UK.
Yeah.
If everybody did the same thing. So, that is a valid argument, but we would argue that, there's no excuse now now that the technology's there. As I say, if you can't have a go at your firefighters for not doing everything right at the incident ground when they are working under those environments where it is chaotic, they are about reducing harm and suffering and saving lives, so they have to take some calculated risks. But as you move away from that and you start to bring the kit back on the truck, back to the station, back to the service area, back to the laundry provider, there's less and less excuse for not getting that bit right. But of course, there are many other things that they're contesting with. And I think there's a dangerous stagnation that we won't do that until we know the outcome of this. And we won't. So we're waiting on that. And
Yeah, but indecision is a decision in itself. I always say when you're deciding when you think you're not making a decision because you're waiting, you are making a decision. Your decision is to wait, and your decision is to prolong this exposure that you're already doing now. There's never going to be a perfect solution, but there is solutions out there now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that low-lying fruit is being picked up by the Decom project, in terms of if they adopt that, that's good. It's the awareness, how you can keep yourself safe. But then behind that, there's nothing out there other than LCO2 to remove 99% of those contaminants and have extend the life of the kit as well. It is a win-win. And that's, I think fire services need to be brave in terms of their finances and say, it might cost us a bit at the initial stages, but long term, we're going to save money because the next time we go out for PPE and 469 kit, we won't be buying anywhere near as much of it because we can turn around what we would have and we can sweat that asset a lot longer. Why does PPE only last 40 washes? It's ridiculous, really.
Yeah.
So then that might encourage fire services to actually buy their own kit if they know that it's going to last a lot longer. But you know what? If I can get 10 years out of that kit or 12 years out of that kit, other than the odd technical refresh, well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to buy it and we're going to launder it ourselves and go in partnership, go into regions if you're not big enough and do it as a region. I think it's the way forward.
Lots of options. For people that are still unfamiliar or want a little bit more, we are going to drop the links in below. We've got a link to the 4-minute video to give people a nice visual understanding of what we've been talking about today. And there'll be links in there to Hunter as well, if they want to go in and find out a little bit more information or what this might look like in association with or within their service itself. Really appreciate your time today, mate. It's great to see people such as yourself leaning in. I think it's nothing worse than when people leave services with all of this massive amount of knowledge and experience and then for their own personal reasons wander off away from it. But that's what I also think is quite unique about the fire and rescue services. People tend to hang around because they have a love and passion for the sector. So I'm glad that some of your experiences are now starting to benefit the wider sector through the implementation of things like this.
Well, thanks for your time, Pete. You're a great host. You're very good at putting people at ease, and what you do is very good.
I fumble through it as best I can.
No, you do fumble.
I always call it learning out loud because I make a few mistakes every time.
You do yourself a disservice, but it was really good. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully the listeners will get something from it. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, brother. I'll speak to you soon. All right.
Cheers. Bye.
Take care, mate. Bye-bye. Firefighters Podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continuing, please head over to our Patreon page where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.